Chapter 141, The Prelude to the Massacre. The day after the first semester of the first year at Shrek Academy ended, the campus was far from empty for the holiday. If anything, it was livelier than during exams, charged with a tense, restless energy. Today was the day of Zhou Yi's public execution. On Sea God Island, Qian Duoduo, vice dean of the Spirit Tool Department, watched Fan Yu kneeling before him. The young man's face was drawn and hollow-eyed. He had been on his knees for 3 days and nights, begging the academy to spare Zhou Yi's life. Qian Duoduo sighed helplessly. "Fan Yu, give it up. Elder Mu won't agree," he said, reluctance in his voice. Fan Yu said nothing, stubborn and immobile as a statue. Qian Duoduo shook his head inwardly. One reaps what one sows. A communication spirit tool at his belt buzzed. Qian Duoduo produced it, and a light screen projected into the air. The image showed the center square of Shrek City. An execution platform had been raised, and the proceedings had begun. On the platform, Zhou Yi was disheveled and tightly bound to an execution rack. The sharp, severe woman she once was gone. Only a wild, desperate look remained in her bloodshot eyes. A figure descended lightly to the center of the stage, Han Roro. She stood cold and composed, a scroll of charges in hand. Her voice, amplified by a spirit tool, rang out across the square as she read Zhou Yi's crimes one by one. Criminal Zhou Yi, during her tenure, you abused your authority, arbitrarily dismissing students who displeased you or who you deemed insufficiently talented, 347 people in all, thereby destroying their futures as spirit masters. During instruction, you carried out inhuman corporal punishments under the pretext of tempering, inflicting physical and psychological trauma on many students. You imposed training far beyond safe limits, ignoring students' endurance, causing permanent disabilities. And in pursuit of false achievements, you tacitly allowed and condoned improper methods among students, corrupting the academy's ethos. The charges fell like iron hammers. In the crowd below, anger rose like a tide. Among those gathered were men and women whose faces bore the lines of hardship, former students who had been expelled by Zhou Yi or who had survived her punishments. When the accusations hit, they reacted with raw, visible fury. Zhou Yi screamed back, hoarse and unhinged. "You fools! You don't understand. My methods were right. Shrek doesn't need mediocrity. Those wastes, those pieces of trash, of course they should be gone. I was filtering for the true elites. You idiots, you simply don't understand." Han Ruoro's expression never wavered. After finishing the charges, she turned and walked down the platform. A woman in plain clothes climbed up behind her, about 27 or 28, carrying a silver-white metal briefcase. She was calm, with a faint, almost serene smile as she addressed the frantic figure strapped to the rack. "Long time no see, Teacher Zhao," she said gently. Zhou Yi's glazed eyes fought to focus but failed to place the woman. The newcomer shook her head, smiling without surprise. "How could you remember me? To you, so-called mediocrities are nothing but trash you can toss away." She bent, set the briefcase at her feet, and clicked it open. Inside, blades gleamed. Scalpels, eyebrow knives, hook knives, rows of cold steel catching the light. She picked out a willow leaf scalpel, as thin as a cicada's wing, with careful, reverent movements, as if handling a precious instrument. She watched the pale reflection along the blade and spoke, her voice flat and steady. 12 years ago, my younger brother enrolled at Shrek. He was assigned to your class. He was a support-type spirit master, no powerful spirit power, but diligent enough to barely pass your first eliminations. He shouldn't have drawn your ire. He shouldn't have been marked a troublemaker for reporting how unreasonable your training methods were. He was punished, escalation after escalation, for speaking up. Her fingertip traced the scalpel's edge as she paused. 3 months of freshman life were hell for him. Daily weighted runs that ruined his body, and during the freshman assessment, you deliberately placed him in the weakest team. Unsurprisingly, he was eliminated. He left Shrek, but didn't go home. A few days later, I found his body in a small hotel in Shrek City. For the first time, a tremor touched her voice, but the smile on her face remained. She gathered a knife edge of spirit power at her fingertip and tapped precisely at Zhou Yi's lower dantian. Zhou Yi's scream tore across the square. Pain like tearing flared in her core as a tiny fissure forced itself open in her dantian. The spirit power she had cultivated for years began to leak, slowly and uncontrollably, and her cultivation level began to fall with no hope of recovery. At the same time, a strange sensation followed. The leaking spirit power drew with it a surge of pure life force that was poured into her limbs and bones. Her pain and panic were tempered by an unprecedented physical clarity. Her body suddenly felt healthier, her senses sharpened as if a fog had been lifted. "What are you doing?" Zhou Yi gasped, fear finally rooting itself in her voice. The woman's smile did not fade. "This is slow slicing, Teacher Zhao. Naturally, I must make sure you remain alive until the process is completed. Don't worry, putting personal vendettas aside, and even for the sake of professional standards, I won't let you die easily." She lowered the willow leaf scalpel. The blade gleamed in the sunlight as it descended toward Zhou Yi's flesh. "Ah!" The execution began. Within a day, news of Zhou Yi's public slow slicing spread across the Duluo Three Kingdoms like wildfire, pushed by the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce's pervasive public opinion network and accompanied by processed footage. The populace gossiped and debated with relish. The major powers watched Shrek's brutal, iron-handed turn with equal parts shock and approval. But the curtain of blood did not signal the end. Zhang Lexuan's actions did not stop. They escalated. A trial, some called it a purge, others a massacre, aimed at Shrek's internal ranks had begun. The Academy's internal reckoning was just getting started. Leveraging the enormous public outcry sparked by the Zhou Yi incident, and taking advantage of elders who had already compromised or ceded authority under pressure, Zhang Lexuan had already seized most of the real power in Shrek's outer court. With covert military backing from the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce, she now held the executioner's knife. The Academy, officially on holiday, had shed its usual youthful clamor for an oppressive, deadly hush. Zhang Lexuan stood motionless on a high platform, her face as cold as snow, calmly surveying the scene below. Enforcement teams, a mixed force of inner court disciples and Ming'an elites, carried 2 lists and fanned out through every corner of the academy like trained hounds, obeying a single order. Execute those on the first list if they resist. Execute those on the second list on sight. In dormitories, offices, and even secret chambers, men and women were beheaded before they could fully comprehend what was happening. Those who surrendered were processed according to the lists. Some were taken alive, others were purged regardless of resistance. The methods were ironclad. There was no room for mercy. Prominent teachers and administrators were arrested in succession, as were relatives tied to certain elders. "Do you know who I am? My father is an elder of the Sea God Pavilion. I'm innocent. I'm truly innocent. Please let me go. Let me go. This is political persecution. It's a conspiracy." Frantic roars, desperate threats, and strangled pleas mingled, all trying to sway the High Arbiter. Zhang Lexuan felt only irritation. She stood there, unmoved, and the purge did not halt for a single shout. The next day, an official announcement, sealed with the dual seals of Shrek Academy and the Sea God Pavilion, spread across the continent through the Ming'an Chamber's channels. It was even briefer than the notice that had accompanied Zhou Yi's execution. Its message was singular and stark: public execution. The accompanying list contained a staggering 237 names, from Shrek's internal administrators and teachers to businesses tied to the academy, members of vassal families, and peripheral forces. Beside each name, crimes were listed plainly: corruption, abuse of power, bullying students, collusion with external forces, betraying the academy's interests. The evidence was presented as conclusive. The Ming'an Chamber even printed a special newspaper edition laying out the case. Under the chamber's media machine, all prior scandals involving Shrek were drowned out by this fiercer, more ruthless self-purification. The continent recoiled at Shrek's extreme remedy, like scraping bone to cure poison. Zhang Lexuan's name, the prospective Sea God Pavilion master who had, with overwhelming force, cleansed millennia of accumulated rot with blood, suddenly drew the attention of every top power in the Duluo Three Kingdoms. No one could ignore her. When the purge wound down, 2 voices spoke in a pitch-black room, their words braided with the quiet rustle of fabric. "After this round of purging, the outer court is largely under control," Zhang Lexuan reported in a slightly hoarse voice, taking advantage of the moment while she was still clear-headed and coherent. "But the personnel losses are heavy. There are big gaps among the lower ranks and the teachers. We need urgent replenishment. Kong Ming'an listened calmly, then acted without hesitation. He lifted her with both hands so she straddled him. His lips brushed her pale shoulder and the line of her neck as he answered in a soft, gentle voice. I'll talk to Juzi and have the Mingmeng chamber cooperate as much as possible. We'll help you assemble and staff the outer court. She hummed softly in acknowledgement. Tilting her head, the smooth curve of her neck presented itself, but a slight frown crossed her brow, a flash of pain. She probably hadn't been physically active lately. After days spent in killing, her body needed time to readjust. She breathed out, tamped the pain down, and lowered her eyes. I can, she began, keeping her voice steady. For now, I can probably only control the outer court. Kong Ming'an remained composed in the dark. He raised a hand and gently stroked her furrowed brow with his thumb. It's all right. Take it step by step. I'm not in a hurry. Taking the outer court is enough for now. The rest will come in time. As he spoke, he took her crossed wrists in his free hand and lifted them above her head, locking them with a grip that prevented escape without causing real harm. If Shrek were to be divided cleanly, it would be into 3 parts: the inner court, the outer court, and Shrek City. The inner and outer courts formed the Academy's heart. Shrek City was an appendage that sustained the Academy. Before the Mingmeng Chamber's intervention, nearly all of Shrek City's industrial lifelines were tied to the Academy and its affiliated forces, but much of that control was exercised through entrenched vassal families. Those families paid a fixed tax to the Academy and otherwise profited freely. Even after Mingmeng seized a significant market share, many of the city's foundational industries remained under those families' hands. Behind those families usually stood one or more elders of the Sea God Pavilion, the source of their confidence in feigning compliance. They weren't an unsolvable problem, but their power was complex. To root them out would take time. Zhang Lexuan lay back on a pillow, sinking into a cotton-soft haze. She bit her lower lip until the slight pain quieted the fog of exhaustion, then spoke as calmly as she could manage. Completely taking the outer court is the limit of my current strength. My prestige is already significant, and it'll probably rise once the outer court is thoroughly under my control. But to push further, I need to be a titled duo myself to command real respect. Otherwise, even Elder Mu wouldn't agree to let me wield more power. It would be too dangerous. Chapter 143, Return to the Sun-Moon Empire, Acquired Sentient Metal. A soft, disappointed sigh escaped Zhang Lexuan. The Mingmeng Chamber of Commerce's intelligence system held vast amounts of information on the families connected to Shrek Academy. If everything were revealed, it would be enough to ruin many of them. But she couldn't act yet. Her strength wasn't sufficient. Had her cultivation reached titled duo before she launched her plan, the number she could clear out would have at least tripled. If she had been a super duo, no one in Shrek could have stopped her. Not even Elder Mu. He might even have helped. After all, this world obeyed strength. A faint sense of relief flickered through her. Despite the deluge of official business, her cultivation had not stagnated. Visitors and petitioners left behind valuable cultivation resources, some for repairing a body worn down by overwork. She had fainted several times overnight, and, even with constant nourishment from pure life energy, her physical frame had been pushed to its limits, and others were Chamber of Commerce specialty products from the blue-silver immortal herb line, mild in nature but extremely effective for spirit masters. Taken together, these things meant her cultivation had actually progressed faster than her usual disciplined routine. Kong Ming'an nodded, his voice steady. You have full authority to mobilize resources within the Chamber of Commerce. Also, he paused, then offered a suggestion. If you have people you trust, Wu Ming, Han Ruoruo, bring them to the chamber headquarters and have them sign the Lingshu Protocol. Once they connect to the Lingshu network, I'll grant them access to resource permissions. That will help them grow faster and lighten your burden. And at the very least, don't let yourself go 2 weeks without sleep again. Zhang Lexuan's eyes flickered. A momentary haze passed over them, then she nodded. She had adjusted once more. The old feelings and the sharp pain had receded. The minor matters were finished. It was time to deal with the real task. She forced herself not to lose consciousness and babble nonsense, fixed her gaze on him, and, seeing her reflection in his eyes, a small curve touched the corner of her mouth. Out of habit, with the reverence of someone uttering a prayer for a blessing, she whispered, "Chains." Kong Ming'an hesitated for a beat, but did not object. After so many encounters, he'd grown adept, far less awkward than at first. Silence fell, and then the metallic scrape of chains dragging echoed through the room. What followed was a chorus of sounds that drowned out everything else. Time slipped by. Several days later, after staying cooped up with Zhang Lexuan to make up for the overdue pact, Kong Ming'an chose to return to the capital. Shrek's internal crises had been temporarily contained. What came next was a matter of time. He no longer needed to remain at Shrek. Juzi and Zhang Lexuan could handle the follow-up. He only had to check in every 2 weeks. Before leaving, he made one more stop to visit Tang San. Tang San was still alive, stubbornly so, but with his rampant killing intent and damaged meridians, he had to lie in bed for another month or two. He wasn't going to die imminently. Kong Ming'an observed that the sea god's divine test inside Tang San remained functional and concluded that the next sea god's test would likely be issued automatically once Tang San gained his 4th spirit ring. Kong Ming'an planned to come back and harvest the god position origin after Tang San completed that milestone. As for Tang San's fate in the meantime, that would be left to the plane will. The plane cared about Tang San's life and death more than Kong did, and would attentively watch over him, so he needn't worry. Stepping through the spatial portal, Kong Ming'an returned directly to his family laboratory. As he stepped out, he felt energy fluctuations coming from the testing ground. He paused and looked over. A petite figure in purple was working through a high-intensity adaptability trial on a spirit tool. Shu Tianzhen, his nominal fiancée, was at the center of it. Kong Ming'an leaned against the doorframe and watched. His interest, however, was not on the spirit tool's design so much as the metal the tool was made from. A faint, pale blue glow in his eyes told him immediately this was acquired sentient metal. The name brought up the knowledge pivot in his mind automatically. To understand acquired sentient metal, one first had to know what sentient metal meant. Sentient metal was similar to the spirit-forged metal described in later histories, a metal with its own awareness that could be partially integrated into a user's body. This material formed the basis of the Sun Moon Empire's exclusive technology, the innate soul tool. Sentient metal fell into 2 categories, innate and acquired. Innate sentient metal was exceedingly rare, possessing awareness naturally from birth and found only by chance. According to family lore, his grandfather's Silver Moon Divine Light Shield had been forged from an innate sentient metal called Silver Moon Brilliance Gold. Acquired sentient metal, by contrast, was produced through cultivation methods. Unlike the later forging techniques developed 10,000 years on, which could coax sentience out of metal via forging, the methods available now were more primitive. To cultivate acquired sentient metal required at least the strength of a titled Duluo, a soul core, and exceptional spirit power endurance. The cultivator selected a piece of metal with high compatibility, enveloped it in spirit power using a special method, and cultivated it day and night until sentience emerged. The time needed depended on the metal type and the spirit master's spirit power quality and quantity, typically 1 to 5 years, making it a lengthy, labor-intensive process. Seeing Shu Tianzhen wielding a spirit tool forged from sentient metal made Kong Ming'an wonder. Had his grandfather's research into fusing innate soul tools with spirit power produced byproducts, some means, perhaps, of mass-producing sentient metal? Chapter 144. How long has it been since body cultivators were buffed? Kong Ming'an pondered, instinctively pulling up the various entries on innate soul tools and sentient metal from his spiritual pivot and laying them out for careful review. Long ago, when he was choosing a carrier for the spiritual pivot, the innate soul tool had been one of his backup options, alongside special hosts like the golden ancient tree and the Tianmeng iceworm. The idea of carrying an expandable, upgradable information processing core sounded exciting. In the end, he chose the spirit ring as the carrier because it was most closely tied to him and more malleable. He also realized then that a physical carrier might introduce transmission delays and heat dissipation problems. As a purely energetic aggregate, a spirit ring largely avoids those drawbacks. Afterward, when he sent his findings on God-bestowed spirit rings to Elder Yi called the method valuable and suggested it might help break the million-year spirit ring barrier someday. That was when Kong Ming'an resolved the spiritual pivot into the spirit ring and stopped paying much attention to innate soul tools and sentient metal. After all, his grandfather was leading the research in that direction. He could afford to wait for the results. But seeing sentient metal and recalling innate soul tools now set a new idea alight. Spirit tools made of sentient metal, because they are sentient, can integrate into a spirit master's body after being crafted. That integration is the mark of an innate soul tool. His grandfather's research had gone even further, aiming to fuse tool and spirit completely, to become, essentially, a level 10 soul engineer who achieved fusion of spirit and tool. According to the records, his grandfather eventually succeeded, making him the only level 10 soul engineer to pull off such a fusion. That proved the approach was feasible. So, could a spirit ring, which is already intimately bound to the spirit, also merge with a spirit tool? He remembered that long ago, when he was trying to coax Miss Meng into becoming his assistant, he had thrown out the idea of crafting spirit tools from spirit rings. Back then, it had been a wild suggestion. But now, with sentient metal in the picture, the idea suddenly seemed plausible. Spirit rings have extreme malleability. They should be highly compatible with spirit tools. Kong Ming'an paused, then pulled up information on god positions and divine artifacts and compared them. If a spirit ring could be merged with sentient metal, the ring would gain both energetic and material properties. God positions lean toward rules of energy. Divine artifacts are material entities. The energy shapes the God position. Matter is refined into a divine artifact. If the two could be combined, it matched his earlier concept of a life-bound treasure perfectly. Constructing a God position and a divine artifact directly inside a spirit ring sounded fantastical and probably not universal. He might manage it, others probably could not. But if sentient metal were incorporated to form a rudimentary God position from the start, and the two were merged to create a life-bound treasure, the result could be improved step by step. It might finally realize the essence of an artifact. If the spirit itself could participate and merge, building on his grandfather's fusion research, this could open a completely new path. Maybe it could even be called an artifact cultivator. Sparks of inspiration sketched out a grand, if still vague, framework in Kong Ming'an's mind. But those were just embryonic ideas. The theories behind God positions and divine artifacts belonged to the God-King tier. He hadn't mastered them, and without solid theoretical support, any castle he built there would be in the air. It was too early to pursue that now. For the moment, he needed to focus on the body cultivator system. The spell cultivator system, boosted by the emergence of the star ring, had become the darling of the current version, greatly strengthened and already exploring ways to reach divine rank, or even match divine rank combat power without a formal breakthrough. With the easy popularization of the imprint faction, spell cultivators were far more widespread than the arduous body refining path. Meanwhile, the body cultivator system had stayed where it was, unchanged for several versions. At present, body cultivators only had the early stage body tempering method, the middle stage ring tempering method, and then, after reaching the 7-ring stage and mastering qi and blood transformation, they continued body tempering through qi and blood alone. The route upward was clear and rock solid, very foundational, but also plain and unadorned. Qi and blood power made the body cultivator's methods less one-dimensional, with the current qi and blood domain, deduced jointly by several title duo of the body sect and increasingly powerful, body cultivators could achieve terrifying combat ability and punch above their rank. But they still had a glaring weakness: short reach. Qi and blood power, unlike spirit power, cannot be projected freely over long distances. It has a strict range limit. That made the short-range nature of body cultivators more and more obvious, and there was no ready solution. There had been some reinforcement, though. The theory of a chi and blood type spirit ring had already been fully worked out via the spiritual pivot. In short, the principle is to gradually replace the spirit power structure inside a spirit ring with one based on chi and blood power, transforming it into a pure chi and blood spirit ring. Used in conjunction with Unring, it could instantly release a massive surge of chi and blood, forcibly boosting physical attributes, pure numerical stacking at its most direct. If they could later condense a chi and blood soul core, body cultivators might try a path similar to the star ring. But whereas spell cultivators place the star ring outside their bodies to draw in external heaven and earth origin chi, body cultivators would be better suited to integrate such a core into their bodies, using it as a furnace to constantly refine and strengthen flesh, increase the quality and quantity of chi and blood, and enhance their derivation abilities. If that ever came to pass, it probably shouldn't be called a star ring anymore. A name more fitting might be the chi and blood furnace. 145. I'm almost becoming the victim here. I have to admit, chi and blood furnace is a good name. It sounds exactly like something a body cultivator would call it. But the technical problems are endless. If the first chi and blood furnace is created by using a chi and blood soul ring to carry a chi and blood soul core and then integrating it into the body, how would you fuse a second one? How would you resolve conflicts caused by multiple furnaces inside a single body? And what would the subsequent development path look like? There were a lot of unanswered questions and no clear research direction yet, but Kong Ming'an didn't mind. Research was never smooth. Setbacks were normal. He glanced at a project in the spiritual pivot titled Feasibility and Structural Model of the Chi and Blood Soul Core, currently running simulations, then slowly turned his gaze away. The road to stabilizing the body cultivator path was long and burdensome. He would have to take it step by step. Suppressing the chaotic thoughts that surfaced whenever he had a moment alone, Kong Ming'an redirected his attention to the testing ground. Xu Tianzhen had just finished testing the spirit tool. The illusory sun behind her faded, and the scorching, sun-like aura around her gradually dissipated. Her light purple, slightly wavy short hair, damp to her neck, clung in sweaty strands to her smooth forehead. A trace of exhaustion lingered between her brows. She panted softly, recuperating from the spirit power drain caused by the test. Clear beads of sweat rolled down her fair, slender neck and dropped onto the purple, form-fitting spirit tool battlesuit, tracing the contours of her petite frame as they slid down the smooth fabric. It was a pretty scene, except, to Kong Ming'an's private amusement, for the almost completely flat line of her chest. He compared his fiancée to the Ice Empress in that regard. Fortunately, Xu Tianzhen could still grow. Her future held promise. The Ice Empress, unless she planned a body transformation with the form transformation art, seemed beyond hope. He let his thoughts drift for a moment, but the girl on the testing platform suddenly spotted him leaning against the doorway. Her eyes lit up like she'd found a treasure. She hurried over, but instead of immediately launching into him, she glanced furtively left and right, as if making sure no one was watching. Kong Ming'an looked down at her, a little puzzled. "What are you doing?" Xu Tianzhen kept her expression cautious as she crept closer and whispered, "You don't have anyone following you this time, right?" "Right. Why?" Ever since his cultivation had improved and his spatial abilities developed further, his capacity for escaping danger had basically reached its peak. He could now slip away calmly from most threats and even take others with him while guaranteeing his own safety. Constant personal guards were no longer necessary. Besides, the two who had served as his usual escorts weren't available. The Ice Empress was in the extreme Northland, working under the Snow Empress to condense her first star ring, and the Snow Empress was busy guiding the powerful spirit beasts there and teaching the revised form transformation art. So he was alone. At that, Xu Tianzhen breathed out a long, relieved sigh. A small, radiant smile curved her lips. Without hesitation, she dove into his arms, wrapping both hands around his waist and nuzzling her small head happily against his chest, a soft heh escaping her. Kong Ming'an watched, amused. He reached out and gently pinched her cheek, which flushed a healthy pink. "What are you doing?" he asked. Her voice was muffled but full of confidence as she mumbled in his arms, It's so rare that you're alone. I absolutely have to seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and enjoy it. Opportunity? Shu Tianzhen lifted her head to meet his gaze, earnest and a touch aggrieved. You're always surrounded by people. Put aside the Snow Empress and the Ice Empress. There's Meng too, and I can't compete. I know I came later, but I'm officially your proper fiancé, okay? I'm practically the wronged party here. Kong Ming'an stifled a laugh with a soft cough. Seeing her pouty little face, he couldn't help but ruffle her slightly wavy short hair. Maybe because her spirit was the sun, her hair felt warm and unusually soft under his fingers. He stroked it gently and said, "Well, at least I'm here right now." That's the kind of line a cheating husband uses to placate his wife when he arrives home, Shu Tianzhen replied with a teasing hum, but she didn't pull away. She held his hand tightly, rubbed against him again, and inhaled his familiar scent like a person taking comfort. Opportunities like this were rare. She wanted to savor it as long as she could. With so many rivals, if you didn't fight for your place, you might be left with nothing. She didn't actually want to be the wronged party. She didn't want to be the one who only watched from outside the door, or listened from under the bed, or waited on the bed until Meng was done, and then helped from the side, then only be left to pick up the pieces afterward. The thought made her shiver. She didn't want that. After a little more idle chatter, Shu Tianzhen wasn't greedy. She let go and went to the adjacent lounge to shower and change. A moment later, she returned to the laboratory in casual clothes, an oversized white short-sleeved shirt with a wide neckline that left one shoulder and her delicate collarbone exposed, revealing smooth, fine skin. A black bra strap peeked out near her shoulder. Because the shirt was so large and her figure so petite, the hem dropped to mid-thigh, making it look like a dress. Below, her straight, slightly plump legs were pressed together, giving off an air of simple, relaxed charm. Kong Ming'an's gaze lingered on the oversized shirt for a beat, and then an amused, slightly bewildered expression crossed his face. "Isn't that my shirt?" Shu Tianzhen placed her hands on her hips, nodded with absolute certainty, and hummed. "That's right." 146. Kong Deming, who quietly accomplishes great things. Kong Ming'an felt a little strained. "You're wearing my clothes?" The girl nodded, completely unembarrassed. "You told me before I could use anything in the lab, so I inherited your wardrobe while I was at it. Besides, you can't wear these old things anymore, so I figured they'd be more comfortable than mine." Kong Ming'an watched her with a sense that she was doing it on purpose, but he had no proof. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "Why do you sound so unhappy?" Shu Tianzhen whispered. She hesitated a moment, then the corner of her mouth lifted. She stepped closer, reached up, and pinched the thin black shoulder strap on her shoulder between two fingers. Slowly she tugged it, then let it snap back against her skin with a soft sound. She tilted her head, eyes wide and innocent, but with a teasing edge. "If you don't like it, I can take it off right now." She reached for the hem of the oversized shirt. "I like it. Stop messing around." Kong Ming'an cut her off, decisive. He caught her restless little hand and forced it down, straightening the collar. He scolded himself inwardly. Must not do anything wrong. "Humph." He tried to sound stern. Shu Tian hummed softly, but promptly leaned into him again, hands winding expertly around his neck, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Old habits were hard to change. If she didn't fight for it, she'd be the aggrieved party, and that simply wouldn't do. It was a pity her fiancé had principles. She'd have to wait a few more years. Kong Ming'an lowered his eyes and held her, a small, soft weight against his chest. One hand rested lightly on her narrow waist to keep her from shifting and falling. As the fabric moved under his palm, he realized something. Apart from the strap, she didn't seem to be wearing much else beneath the oversized shirt. If she shifted even a little, the hem could ride up and reveal the same black material as the strap. She was testing him constantly. He grumbled inwardly and smoothed the shirt back down. Shu Tianzhen began to squirm and rub up against him for a while longer before finally settling down, content. Only then did she start chattering about everything that had gone on in the capital while he had been away. Kong Ming'an adjusted his posture so she could lean more comfortably and listened. He hadn't kept up with capital affairs lately. He'd been in Shrek City dealing with Shrek matters, and before that he'd been holed up in the lab, absorbed in studying Wang Donger's spirit and soul structure. It was hardly surprising he'd missed the political shifts. Besides, he wasn't worried. With Grandpa Kong and Elder Yi, two super old ones, in charge, the capital was in safe hands. Because the military reforms succeeded and the army got stronger, Xu Tianzhen said, for a while people in the empire were pushing hard for a direct war against the Duluo Three Kingdoms. But after Grandpa announced he'd completed that crucial experiment on fusing spirit tools with spirits, the warmongers went quiet. She went on. The radicals who wanted expansion and the more moderate factions looking for balance, suddenly they were all on the same page. Even my imperial father agreed with Grandpa Kong's strategy: stable development, build strength, advance spirit tool technology, and win by absolute superiority. Kong Ming'an's ears pricked at the phrase, fusion of spirit tool and spirit. He interrupted, surprised. Wait, did you say Grandpa's experiment on fusing spirit tools with spirits succeeded? Xu Tianzhen blinked her deep purple eyes and nodded. Yes, it was about 2 or 3 months ago. But they aren't making it public. It's only being circulated quietly among the Empire's top officials. She gave him a curious look when he seemed confused. You didn't know? Grandpa Kong didn't tell you? He shook his head. He'd certainly heard nothing. For a moment he wondered if he'd been so absorbed in his own experiments that he'd missed the news. Then Xu Tianzhen added, recalling something her father had told her in private. But my imperial father said, Grandpa isn't entirely satisfied with the results. He told my father that the outcome wasn't the perfect form he'd envisioned, and that he plans to keep working on it. Kong Ming'an thought it through, and piece by piece, the situation fell into place. In the original timeline, Grandpa Kong had only been able to research with his subordinates, many Rank 9 soul engineers, and the fusion experiment took over a decade to complete. In this life, because of Ming'an's interventions, Grandpa Kong's power had advanced far beyond his peers. He had become a rank 98 Super Duluo and had come into contact with and mastered the body cultivator system. Along with that came stronger physical cultivation, the power of qi and blood, and access to theoretical knowledge and research directions Ming'an had shared. With a very different starting point and a far broader vision, Grandpa's standards had simply become higher. What might once have been deemed an epoch-making breakthrough, the fusion of spirit tools and spirits, was now only an interim achievement on the way to something greater. That explained why Elder Yi could frequently publish breakthroughs like the fusion limit elevation method and the artificial spirit ring method, while Grandpa's camp remained unusually quiet. They weren't stagnant, they were holding back, aiming for a much larger goal. The successful fusion experiment was likely just one step in a much bigger research plan. Chapter 147, Jijuechen. Sword Intent, Concept. Kong Ming'an knew his grandfather well, the sort who planned every step before moving and kept his true capabilities tightly guarded. If Grandfather Kong had announced publicly that he had completed the fusion of spirit and spirit tool, it meant he very likely already possessed an even more advanced, perfected method of fusion. He might already be laying the groundwork for the next generation of research based on that achievement. Keeping a trump card hidden was a family trait of the Kong clan, a legacy passed down carefully. The thought made anticipation stir in Kong Ming'an. He wanted to see for himself what his grandfather called unsatisfactory results. He looked down at Xu Tianzhen in his arms. Do you know where Grandpa is now? Is he still in the Hall of Worship? Xu Tianzhen thought for a moment. He should be in his private lab at the Hall of Worship. I'll take you there. She was about to leap down, but Kong Ming'an gently pressed on her shoulder. Change your clothes first, then we'll go. She blinked, glancing at the oversized short-sleeved shirt she wore, clearly his, slipping off one shoulder. A small smile curved her lips. She hopped down, gave an exaggerated noble curtsy with a mock-serious voice, "Yes, my esteemed fiancé," and darted into the adjacent lounge to change. Outside, subtle spatial ripples spread from a laboratory deep inside the Hall of Worship. Kong Ming'an and Xu Tianzhen stepped out of the lounge hand in hand. She was now dressed in a normal short skirt. A distinct scent of metallic coolant mixed with the dense tang of spirit power washed over them. Kong Ming'an detected several concentrations of high-energy aggregates. He flashed his highest clearance, and they passed into the lab. The laboratory was cavernous, lit by soft spirit tool lighting that made the space feel like day. Arrayed around them were precise instruments blinking with indicator lights. Dozens of researchers in white hurried about with a tense, ordered efficiency. Kong Ming'an led Zhu Tianzhen through several heavy gates requiring identity verification and stopped at a raised observation deck. This was the testing ground where he had once demonstrated his body-tempering method to the Empire's officials. Below, inside a testing arena sealed by a high-intensity energy barrier, a young man in his early 20s sat. He wore a fitted dark spirit tool testing suit connected to dozens of fine energy-conducting wires. White-robed technicians recorded data in silence. He sat cross-legged with eyes closed, aura calm and compact, as if isolated from everything. Resting across his knees lay a black, archaic longsword. It was Jijuechen. Kong Ming'an had marked Jijuechen as a talent and had even sent people to recruit him into Mingde Hall, so he recognized him instantly. But his gaze snagged on the black longsword. Pale blue light flared in his eyes as his energy vision activated. He pierced the sword's exterior to examine its internal energy structure. His expression sharpened. This sword was Jijuechen's spirit. That didn't fit with his memory. Jijuechen's spirit should have been an ordinary quality longsword, yet this blade resembled Ji's meteoric iron sword far more. Kong Ming'an focused and saw the spiritual radiance within the black longsword. It was intimately linked to Jijuechen and bore the aura of an advanced spirit. He realized that Jijuechen's meteoric iron sword had undergone fusion with his spirit. As he pondered, Jijuechen, still in deep meditation, radiated a peculiar oppressive aura. His own presence, his spirit fluctuations, even some vital signs seemed forcibly compressed and suppressed by an invisible pressure. All those contained forces converged like tributaries into the black longsword on his knees. The testing ground fell into a domain of absolute stillness, the black blade the only thing that seemed to exist in that silence. A thought came to Kong Ming'an. This was a sword maniac domain, silence. He raised a hand instinctively and let spirit power and mental force vibrate at a matching frequency, trying to reproduce the effect. A faint prototype of a domain, similar but not identical to Jijuechen's, formed in his palm. He frowned, dispersed it, tried again, and the same lack remained. He let the ephemeral construct vanish. Watching Jijuechen's man-sword body integration below, Kong Ming'an realized what the missing element was. A concept unique to Jijuechen. In his case, sword intent. A concept is the power born when one's soul, will, and mental force are perfectly fused into a single essence. For example, Mu'en's reign over the world is such a method, a fusion of soul, will, and mental force that empowers spirit power. Even the Snow Empress's 3 ultimate skills derive their strength from concept-level mastery. A concept is the culmination of will and technique. Because every soul and will are unique, a concept is always personal and cannot be purely copied. Jijuechen's path was one of sword intent, an extreme concentration of self toward the sword. For a moment, a stray image flitted through Kong Ming'an's mind, the plotline involving Wang Donger. She was the fallen young lord of the Clear Sky sect, naturally proud, but forced into submission to save the 2 elders who had raised her. She had no recourse but to endure humiliation and obey the protagonist's orders. The notion of such a plot struck him as strange. Chapter 148, You're right, but Sword Cultivator, a genius in some sense. No, he is a genius now. Kong Ming'an judged quietly. From the way Jijuechen's tool spirit had transformed, an ordinary longsword into the current black longsword that had reached advanced spirit level, it was obvious someone had found a way to fuse sentient metal with a tool spirit to raise its quality. If Jijuechen improved his physique a little using the Blue-Silver Immortal Herb series, his bottleneck would be gone, at least until he reached Super Duoluo, maybe even Limit Duoluo. With such pure sword intent and his innate aptitude resolved, Jijuechen's future was immeasurable. What intrigued Kong most right now, though, was that sword intent and the specifics of the spirit evolution technique. He watched intently. At one point, Jijuechen suddenly opened his eyes. A razor-sharp light flashed through them like a blade. He rose, his right hand gripping the black longsword resting in his lap. The tightly restrained aura around him shifted instantly into a sharp, crystalline sword intent that rippled outward. 6 perfectly matched spirit rings, yellow, yellow, purple, purple, black, black, rose from beneath his feet. The black longsword in his hand seemed to take on a soul. The blade hummed and its color shifted from jet black to pure, flawless snowy white, an inner radiance glowing through it. The 6 spirit rings did not hover beside him long. They contracted rapidly into 6 streams of light and stamped themselves, one by one, along the spine of the snowy white longsword. With each ring embedded, the sword's cutting force surged. When all 6 were in place, the weapon felt alive. A terrifying sword pressure filled the area, subtly warping the surrounding energy. Even Jijuechen's outline seemed to blur under that pressure. This was the ring embedding method. Kong recognized it. Materials on this technique had been among the documents he'd had uploaded to the Spiritual Pivot database after confirming cooperation with the 9 Treasure Glazed Tile School. There were ancient texts the school had preserved for thousands of years, records of their experiments in spirit evolution. He hadn't read everything in detail. He'd simply enriched the database with them for those with sufficient access. He hadn't expected to see the method used here, and it looked like Jijuechen had made his own modifications. Kong's curiosity piqued. He stepped forward and spatial ripples swallowed him. In the next instant, he stood inside the testing ground, not far from Jijuechen, whose aura was at its peak. The technicians nearby were startled by the sudden intrusion. Some reached for an alarm out of instinct, but when they saw Kong Ming'an, they all stopped. Kong looked at Jijuechen, whose eyes were like drawn swords, and held out his hand in invitation. "Come." Jijuechen frowned in puzzlement. Then his pupils constricted. Beside Kong Ming'an, 5 spirit rings appeared in sequence, 2 silver white, 2 blood red, and 1 dark red ring patterned with gold. A terrifying aura, vast and abyssal and unlike any spirit king's, descended with a roar and filled the testing ground. Jijuechen paused, then a fierce exhilaration bloomed within him. His sword intent, already condensed to the extreme, surged again with the rush of emotion and climbed to a new peak. Sword intent strengthens with the practitioner's state of mind. For Ji, who had always hungered for powerful opponents to test his blade, Kong's arrival was an unexpected delight. That feeling pushed his sword intent to its highest pitch yet. There were no words, no elaborate moves. At a certain critical instant, Jijuechen moved, or rather, the sword in his hand moved. A clear, melodious, tearing cry of steel split the air. All restraint exploded into a single absolute burst. Vast potential compressed to the sword's point, cutting the air and detonating within the small, energy-barriered testing ground. Chaotic currents of energy raged. Blinding light swallowed everyone's vision. Xu Tianzhen had come to the observation deck at some point, gripping the railing without realizing it, her deep purple eyes fixed and tense. Slowly, the turbulence of energy and light abated. 2 figures still stood. Jijuechen's sword hand hung at his side, trembling. Beads of sweat dampened his temples. The snowy white longsword had reverted to its original black, and the 6 spirit rings embedded in the blade had detached, their glow fading. Kong Ming'an stood steady, looking at the sharp spirit power still coalescing in his palm from the earlier blow. After studying it briefly, he closed his fingers and let that lingering power dissipate. He lifted his head and introduced himself. Kong Ming'an. Jijuechen's body stiffened. He drew a breath to steady his fatigued body and replied, "Jijuechen." They were now properly acquainted. Jijuechen's eyes remained fixed on Kong, battle lust undiminished and now even more fervent. "Another round?" he asked. Kong Ming'an chuckled inwardly at the apt label. He truly was a sword cultivator, then shook his head. "Wait a little longer. Recover your spirit power first." He could tell the previous strike had nearly exhausted Jijuechen's spirit power. Jijuechen nodded and sat cross-legged to meditate and recover. Kong thought for a moment, then withdrew several herbs that pulsed with odd energy from his storage spirit tool: blue-silver, autumn water dew, and blue-silver, rice, splendorous golden orchid. He handed them to Jijuechen. Ji looked up, puzzled. Kong said calmly, "Eat them. They'll make you stronger. You're not strong enough yet." Jijuechen examined the blue-silver immortal herbs. After a brief hesitation, he put them into his mouth and began to refine them in silence. Kong Ming'an nodded, already eager to see how far Ji's sword intent would climb once his strength increased. A steady voice, warm with satisfaction, sounded behind him. How was it? Kong Ming'an turned and saw his grandfather, Kong Deming, standing quietly behind him. He shook his head in disbelief. It's truly unexpected, he said. Having personally taken Ji Jueqin's peak strike, Kong Ming'an understood better than anyone the true nature of that sword and everything bound up in it. The sword fanatic domain, utter silence, the man-sword fusion, extreme sword intent amplification, the strange ring-unlinking interlock technique, an evolved, advanced spirit, and a body forged by a method like body tempering, but skewed towards sword chi tempering. Ji Jueqin had fused all those elements perfectly and poured them into a single blade. That condensed power let him, only a spirit emperor, release a full-force blow roughly comparable to a regular titled Duluo who had just reached the 90th level, before obtaining a 9th spirit ring and without using a martial soul true body. Compared to that, the Ice Empress, who had lived 100,000 years yet still depended solely on bloodline talent, seemed laughably limited. Grandfather, Kong Ming'an said, admiration in his voice, you really do great things in silence. Kong Deming waved the praise away and laughed softly as his gaze swept over Ji Jueqin, who was busy refining medicinal energies. You can see he's a special case. Not everyone carries a sword for 10 years and nourishes it day in, day out until it gains a faint spirituality. All I did was let the child completely unleash his genius. Even a special case can be outrageous, Kong Ming'an replied, and Kong Deming chuckled. He pointed at the two strangely glowing silver spirit rings on Kong Ming'an's body. Compared to yours, what I've done is only a drop in the bucket. They both laughed and moved on. So what now? Kong Ming'an asked. Kong Deming smiled benevolently. Come with me. I want to show you what I've been working on. Actually, he added as he walked, it was finished a year ago. Your ideas helped, and some other theories. I've completed the final fusion of the Silver Moon Martial Soul with the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield. He raised his right hand. Pure silver moonlight poured from his palm, soft but unmistakably bright. A delicate silver moon formed there, the manifestation of Kong Deming's Silver Moon Martial Soul. To the untrained eye, it looked the same as before, but Kong Ming'an stared closely and felt something different at once. If the old Silver Moon Martial Soul had been a simple aggregation of spirit energy, this was something else entirely. Every wisp of moonlight now contained an intricate latticework of spirit tool core formations, countless, complex, exquisitely arranged. They weren't mere attachments or add-ons, they were fused into the moonlight itself, like stars embedded in the night sky, natural, seamless, without the slightest jolt. The silver moon had become more than an energy body. It now had an internal structure, function, and precision like a living spirit tool. This is the fused Silver Moon Martial Soul, Kong Deming said, smiling. My Silver Moon Martial Soul and the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield are indistinguishable now. The spirit tool is the spirit, and the spirit is the spirit tool. With this fusion, I can keep adding spirit tool core formations and auxiliary functions, expand its capabilities, and push it higher. Kong Ming'an did not reply. He was fixed on the silver moon, his eyes bright. He could see a perfect resonance had formed between the martial soul and its carrier, the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield. They were interdependent, mutually reinforcing. Energy flowed smoothly between them, without stagnation or conflict, an almost sacred sense of completion. It felt as if two parts that had originally come from the same source, external and internal, had finally found each other and returned to a complete whole. Fragments of knowledge flashed through Kong Ming'an's mind. The essence of spirit, the energy structure of spirit tools, the Asura god's teachings on divine artifacts, his own musings on god positions and divine artifacts. At some point, something clicked. He raised his head, eyes clear and steady. Kong Deming saw the change in his grandson's expression and smiled knowingly. You've had an idea. Kong Ming'an nodded. What he had glimpsed in his grandfather's fusion was the shape of a divine artifact, and in a distant echo, the shadow of battlefield armor 10,000 years hence. He thought first of the divine artifact aspect. Take the first sea god as an example. His spirit had been a trident. Before he reached the sea god position, that trident was an extraordinarily high-quality spirit, but still a spirit, soul, spirit energy, without a true material body that could bear its full power. After he ascended, the trident spirit sublimated. The first sea god used vast divine force and the power of faith as raw materials to forge an immortal body for that trident spirit. When the trident merged into that body, the sea god trident was born. A pure spirit, no matter how it appears, tends to remain at the level of soul, spirit, and spirit power. Even when a tool spirit displays a physical form, it's usually a condensation of spirit power, not a genuine material entity. Such a spirit is like a soul without a body, potent but incomplete. Give a spirit a perfectly compatible material body, though, and it becomes whole, soul and body fused into an independent life that can self-circulate and grow. The Silver Moon Divine Light Shield is the body Kong Deming carefully forged and matched to the Silver Moon Martial Soul. The Martial Soul is the soul of that body. Together they form a complete, self-contained existence, a divine artifact in the making. Chapter 150, the beginning of the Artifact Cultivator. The fusion of body and soul is far from a simple 1+1. It is an essential complement and sublimation, a coordination and circulation on a higher level that produces a leap in life form. The battle armor idea is relatively straightforward, putting a mecha onto the spirit, while what Grandpa Kong had done was to give the spirit a true body. Both are ways of providing a vessel for the spirit. The latter is harder, and the two methods could even be combined. Putting these conclusions together with his still developing idea, using the spirit ring as a foundation, fusing sentient metal, and forging a life-bound treasure, Kong Ming'an's mind raced. Could such a life-bound treasure be fused with a spirit? Could he forge his own spirit and spirit rings entirely into a life-bound treasure bound to his life? The possibilities multiplied. Based on his calculations, the path seemed genuinely promising, though far more complicated to deduce than the spell or body cultivator routes, and demanding a great deal of time. After a short pause, he sketched a tentative framework from the flood of ideas and sent it to the spiritual pivot for preliminary analysis. He then looked at his grandfather and said, "Your achievements alone will keep me occupied for a long time." "As long as they're useful to you, that's enough," Kong Deming replied. He nodded, turned, and led Kong Ming'an and Shu Tianzhen deeper into the laboratory, explaining as they walked. "Over the past few years, based on the theories and resources you provided and the computing power of the spiritual pivot, I've made 3 relatively important breakthroughs. The first is the deep fusion of spirit and spirit tool. I think you've already seen most of that, so I won't dwell on it. The second," he glanced toward the testing field in the distance, "TEF is a derivative technique I discovered while researching spirit tool fusion, a method to enhance a spirit's quality by having it fuse with specific sentient metal. That boy Jijuechen is the best example." Kong Deming's voice carried a hint of admiration. His extraterrestrial meteorite iron sword, nurtured constantly for 10 years by his sword intent and spirit power, long ago developed complete sentience. After I suggested some ideas about spirit tool fusion, he fully fused his spirit with that sword. The only pity was the sword's material. Though extraordinary, it had its limits, so his spirit only rose to the level of an advanced spirit. But this confirms a fact. For a tool spirit, fusing with sentient metal that has been nurtured by its wielder's spirit power for a long time, or metal whose attributes match closely, can, by certain secret methods, directly enhance the spirit's quality. It's similar to a spirit master consuming a heaven and earth treasure to advance their spirit. Fusing with sentient metal is like letting the spirit consume the heaven and earth treasure most compatible with it. Kong Deming slowed his pace. To systematically verify and seek ways to popularize this, I used the spiritual pivot's computing power to analyze the essence of sentient metal. The spiritual pivot's core conclusion was that sentient metal is produced when metal remains in a high concentration, highly active spirit power environment for a long time, allowing its weak inherent sentience to be nourished, grow, and transform. Traditionally, only a rank 9 soul engineer using their own spirit power over a long period could nurture such metal. The result was metal imprinted with an extremely strong personal spirit signature, rendering it nearly unusable by others, just like my Silver Moon Divine Light Shield. An outsider cannot wield it because the spirit power doesn't fit. So I changed the approach. Kong Deming looked at Kong Ming'an. I used the massive, relatively pure, attribute-less spirit power gathered in the spirit power pool you forged in the demiplane to create a stable, high spirit power environment. We placed selected metal blanks inside, and over half a year, catalyzed a batch of semi-finished sentient metal, nascently sentient but not yet fully formed. Then I recruited spirit masters with different tool spirits to perform the final directional nurturing on those semi-finished pieces. After the sentient metal recognized its master and finalized its form, I used my improved fusion method to have their spirits fuse with the sentient metal they had nurtured. The final tests showed the participating tool spirits increased in quality to varying degrees. This proves the path of tool spirits enhancing themselves by fusing with sentient metal is viable and reproducible. Kong Ming'an's eyes brightened. He had to admit, when it came to research on metals and spirit tools, Grandpa Kong was inventive. He'd achieved all this in just a few years, during which he still had to step out to handle important state affairs for Sun Moon. Producing such results under those conditions was impressive. The method of mass-producing semi-finished pieces and letting spirit masters finish them cleverly sidestepped the problem of incompatible spirit power imprints, greatly improving sentient metal's applicability. Still, a half-year catalysis time was not short. Efficiency was low. Perhaps forging techniques from 10,000 years in the future could be developed earlier. After all, if they appeared later, they were feasible. With that in mind, Kong Ming'an casually added another pending deduction project to the spiritual pivot. They soon reached Kong Deming's private laboratory, where he handled highly confidential research. He invited the two to take seats and continued. The third item is still semi-finished. It concerns the interference and alteration of a spirit's form by fusing with sentient metal. Kong Ming'an immediately leaned in. After a moment, he asked, "Like the change to Jijuechen's spirit?" "Exactly." Kong Deming smiled. Jijuechen's spirit had been the most common longsword form, but after fusing with the meteorite iron sword, his spirit's form became permanently fixed to that sword's appearance. That shows the fusion can directly interfere with or even reshape a spirit's external form. He looked at Shu Tianzhen, who had been standing quietly beside Kong Ming'an. "Tianzhen, take out your spirit tool." "Yes, Grandpa Kong." Shu Tianzhen nodded. With a flick of her wrist, a longsword-shaped spirit tool appeared in her hand, streamlined and glowing with a reddish metallic sheen, the exact item Kong Ming'an had seen before. Aside, the so-called artifact cultivator falls into two types. First, the traditional artifact cultivator, like Jijuechen, a sword cultivator, or Xiao Xiao, who uses a cauldron, whose spirit structures are relatively simple. Second is the spirit tool artifact cultivator, exemplified by Kong Deming, who integrates spirit tools into his spirit. As spirit tool technology advances, such practitioners' spirits are continuously refined and strengthened. Auxiliary professions, like Mecha masters, also fall under the spirit tool artifact cultivator category. This will be covered in the next chapter. What era is it where people still practice the traditional artifact cultivator? Chapter 151, Body Cultivator. Mech equals. Kong Ming'an's energy vision swept over the sword and easily detected the solar spirit aura Shu Tianzhen had implanted in it, as well as a faint emergent spiritual resonance linked to her own spirit power. It was the same kind of bond between sentient metal and its nurturer he had observed before. Still, the connection between Shu Tianzhen and her sword was not the same as Jijuechen's complete fusion with that extraterrestrial meteorite iron blade. Kong Tianzhen, activate it like you normally do, then attempt spirit manifestation, Kong Deming called from the sidelines. Shu Tianzhen nodded and obeyed. Under Kong Ming'an's scrutiny, she first injected spirit energy into the longsword. The blade flared with a scorching halo, no different from her previous tests. Then she performed spirit manifestation. What Kong Ming'an expected did not happen. There was no solar phantom appearing behind her, no sudden rise in her body temperature. Instead, the crimson longsword in her hand suddenly burst into blinding, searing light, like a miniature sun. The solar energy had found an ideal conduit and amplifier, entirely contained within the blade. Energy fluctuations shot up, the temperature spiked, and because the power was perfectly contained and circulated by the sword, Shu Tianzhen's own aura surged in sympathy. Kong Ming'an's expression shifted. It was clear that with this specially forged spirit tool longsword acting as a medium, Shu Tianzhen's solar spirit power had been fully guided and unleashed inside the weapon. The sentient metal had temporarily reshaped the manifested form of her solar spirit. See that? Kong Deming's voice cut in. Sentient metal doesn't only fuse with a tool spirit. For energy or element-type spirits, those whose forms are malleable, like my Silver Moon and Tianzhen's Sun, it's possible to alter their manifested form. Just as my Silver Moon martial soul, after bonding with the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield, tends to take on the shield's appearance. In a deep fusion or binding, the spirit's manifested form will largely follow the form of the sentient metal medium. Kong Ming'an's eyes grew serious. His grandfather's experiments were no mere curiosities. They were carving out a new branch of cultivation, spirit quality enhancement, and spirit form customization. Together with earlier conclusions about life-bound treasures and other breakthroughs, the prototype of an artifact cultivator was forming right before his eyes. Before he could fully take that in, Kong Deming strode to the innermost part of the laboratory and stood before a tall object shrouded by a heavy dark gray curtain. Kong Ming'an's gaze was drawn to the covered shape beneath, tall, cold, powerful. With a single pull, whoosh, the curtain dropped. Revealed beneath was a colossal humanoid figure, built entirely of armor, gleaming with a metallic sheen. Smooth, powerful lines, heavy, angular plating, precise transmission structures at the joints, an aura of latent strength that hung about it as it stood. Kong Ming'an's breath caught. A mech. He stared at the armored behemoth, momentarily speechless. Kong Deming, unusually animated, began to explain. This is a new creation I've developed from existing humanoid spirit tools, combined with everything I know about fusing spirits and spirit tools, he said. For now, I've called it Humanoid Spirit Tool Mechanical Armor. Why not just call it a mech? Kong Ming'an cut in. Kong Deming blinked, surprised that his grandson's first thought was naming, but the two-syllable word pleased him. A spark of amusement lit his features. Mech, he repeated. Good, fits it well. From now on, we'll call it a mech. He walked up to the machine and with a slight thought, the Silver Moon Martial Soul, already fused with the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield, materialized in his palm. Moonlight flowed along its surface like a miniature star chart, precise and radiant. He touched it to the mech's chest. A faint mechanical whir sounded. The chest plate slid open like a blooming lotus, revealing an empty recess shaped exactly for the Silver Moon Martial Soul. Kong Deming placed it in. Click! The fit was perfect. The chest sealed, and brilliant silver streams like liquid mercury spread from the core through every seam of the armor. The dull metallic shell took on a presence, and two cold silver-white lights ignited in the eye sockets. Then, amid a low chorus of hydraulics and transmission whirs, the towering figure shifted and stepped forward. The sound was heavy, but it carried a majestic authority that drew attention. Kong Ming'an watched with a small, impressed frown, feeling that his grandfather had used the spirit like some kind of core reactor. "Grandpa, are you planning to?" he started. Kong Deming smiled at the mech, satisfaction in his eyes. "What if I fully integrate this mech to my spirit, make it part of me?" he said. Kong Ming'an suppressed a laugh. His grandfather certainly knew how to dream big. Before he could reply, Kong Deming continued, chuckling. "I am not unskilled with spirit techniques. Neither the traditional spirit master path nor the spell cultivator you developed fits me perfectly. The body cultivator path gave me a powerful physical form, and that satisfies me, but raw physical power can't fully leverage what I can do with spirit tool technology. So, the mech came into being." 152. The Dharma cannot be practiced by the same person. He raised a hand and patted the cold leg armor of the mech with great reverence. The clang echoed. "At first, I only meant to integrate the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield into my spirit, but I found that simply doing that wasn't enough. After thinking it over, I decided to forge a super spirit tool that surpasses the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield and then integrate it into my spirit. And this mech is the best extension and vessel I could find for my spirit." Kong Deming's voice grew excited. This was the confidence of a man who had found his path and broken through his confusion. Integrate it into my spirit. That way it will be linked to my life and soul. Our minds will be connected. Then I can freely apply all my knowledge of spirit tools to continuously strengthen and upgrade it. It can incorporate various powerful sentient metals so it can evolve and transform like a living creature. It will become the ultimate expression of my spirit tool technology and the perfect amplifier for my body cultivator power. There was an undeniable grandeur in his tone. Once the mech is integrated into my spirit, I can control this steel body as if it were my own arm, just by thinking. Using my powerful physical body, tempered by body cultivation, as the most stable, reliable core to control this steel body, which I can make ever stronger and larger with my hands. This, he looked at his grandson earnestly and laughed loudly, is the Tao that belongs to me, Kong Deming. Kong Ming'an was momentarily speechless and simply watched his grandfather. From the passion and certainty in those eyes, he understood that this wasn't a whim. His grandfather had truly found the path that suited him best. As dusk fell, Kong Ming'an and Shu Tianjin walked side by side along the main street from the Hall of Worship back to the Kong family estate. They had not teleported home. Instead, they wandered like ordinary people as the city's lanterns began to glow. Shu Tianjin held Kong Ming'an's hand tightly, unwilling to miss this rare moment of quiet togetherness, a warm smile on her face. Kong Ming'an walked slowly, feeling the softness in his palm while his mind raced, sorting through everything he had seen and heard. Before they left, his grandfather had given him all of his recent achievements, piles of notes and records bundled together. The information was vast, and organizing it would take time, but it confirmed something. His grandfather was truly adept at invention. If Ming'an's earlier idea of an artifact cultivator had been only a crude prototype backed by a few theoretical results, then, witnessing his grandfather's plan to turn the Silver Moon Divine Light Shield into part of his spirit, and even to integrate an entire mech, completed the picture. The artifact cultivator prototype now snapped into place in his mind, the last pieces of the puzzle falling into position. Kong Ming'an's gaze was calm as he analyzed the situation. The basic framework of an artifact cultivator was largely set, but several crucial problems remained before he could pursue the path in earnest. The most pressing was the materials problem, more specifically, the problem of spiritual metals. Unlike the metals that would appear 10,000 years hence, where smiths could awaken a metal's spirit through tempering, spirit-forged metals that not only gained spirituality, but also saw dramatic improvements in physical strength and spirit conductivity, metals in the present era were limited. Sentient metal, cultivated purely through spirit power, could indeed develop spirituality and be integrated into a body, but their innate physical strength and energy capacity did not change qualitatively. They only improved slightly and remained weak. The power and potential of spirit tools, especially high-tier spirit tools and the envisioned life-bound treasure, depend heavily on their core materials. Simple sentient metal, as things stood, would not be enough. Most of Ming'an's current effort had gone into building systems for body cultivation and spell cultivation. More precisely, his focus had been on spell cultivation. Under those circumstances, he hadn't paid much attention to spirit tool issues. But now that the artifact cultivator path had emerged, his attention had to shift back. He instinctively felt the two spirit rings on his fingers, the two silver-glowing rings that held swirling galaxy-like patterns, and the dark red, gold-patterned ring that contained the Asura god position origin. With such special spirit rings, it would be a shame not to pursue the artifact route and attempt to forge a life-bound treasure. Yet cultivating spell, body, and artifact simultaneously could create conflicts. A spell cultivator treats a spirit ring as a vessel for soul skill modules. A body cultivator needs to transform the ring into a chi and blood soul ring to unleash the physical body's power through ring release. An artifact cultivator would likely rely on deep malleability theory of the spirit ring, combined with the ring embedding method, to fuse a ring's power and characteristics more perfectly into the spirit or into a life-bound treasure. Each system uses the spirit ring in fundamentally different ways, making true dual cultivation of body and spell, or triple cultivation of body, spell, and artifact, potentially very difficult. To reconcile them all, he might eventually need to create something like a second spirit or an artificial spirit as an intermediary vessel. But that could wait. The immediate priority was solving the materials problem. He had to pioneer a metal forging path suitable for their era. Maybe he could find that Xiao Hongchen's three-legged golden-toed spirit seemed perfectly suited to blacksmithing. With him, this could be a good option. Thinking that, Ming'an didn't hesitate. He sent a message to Xiao Hongchen and continued searching for knowledge about forging. Just then his steps slowed. Shu Tianjin glanced up at him, puzzled. "What's wrong?" she asked. Kong Ming'an shook his head, his expression smoothing. He squeezed her hand gently. "Nothing. Let's go." They resumed walking down the dimly lit street. From the corner of his awareness, Ming'an noticed the entrance to a dark alley not far behind them. There, a slender figure with blue-pink hair was hiding cautiously, suppressing her aura, clearly nervous and afraid of being spotted by whoever she was tailing. Ming'an's lips curved into a small smile. The fish had taken the bait. The target has been locked. The target has been locked. Deep in the dim alley, Wang Donger leaned against the cold, rough wall, doing her best to suppress her aura. Her body trembled with tension. Her blue-pink eyes were fixed on the alley entrance, every muscle coiled to flee at a moment's notice. After waiting and seeing no unusual movement outside, she eased slightly and adjusted her breathing. Cautiously, she peered out again, watching the young man and woman in the distance with a solemn expression. Her reason for trailing them reached back over a month, to the day she woke in the Kong family Chamber of Commerce. She had just come out of the so-called testing pod and was struck by a profound weakness all over, a strange disconnect between soul and body. While still dazed, she was told she had slept for 3 whole months. 3 months. It felt like she had only closed her eyes and opened them again. Time had been stolen from her, and she had no memories of it. The Chamber of Commerce staff's polite but oddly evasive farewell didn't help. If you still have questions, you are welcome to come to the Chamber of Commerce at any time, and we will give you a satisfactory answer. Who could stay calm after something like that? What had happened during those 3 months? Why did she wake so disoriented and weak? She quietly asked some seniors in her club, core members who had already connected to the Lingshu network. Their process was simple. Put on the helmet, connect to the network, sign the contract, explore a bit, then disconnect. 10 to 20 minutes at most. None of them had slept for months. She was clearly an exception. But this specialness brought fear rather than advantage. For days after returning from the Chamber of Commerce, she felt foggy and unfocused. Wild thoughts came. Had she been exposed? Was it a trap? Had some terrifying entity targeted her? Would she be arrested as a spy? After a few days, the panic faded and her mind cleared. Then, when she tried meditating, she discovered her spirit power had mysteriously broken through to level 40, and when she subconsciously summoned her spirit, there was an extra presence, a third spirit. The third spirit was a sky-blue humanoid phantom, appearing as a handsome man in luxurious robes. Every attempt to actively summon him left her with an oppressive heaviness that drained her. She could only observe his form and could not learn his name. That almost proved something had indeed happened during those 3 months. For the past month, she had quietly investigated, but she couldn't act openly. She harbored a secret, and she had come to the Sun Moon Empire with ulterior motives. Going back to the Chamber of Commerce felt like walking into a trap. Before she could safely search for her big father and second father, she had to be cautious. After a month of searching, she had found almost nothing, so she didn't return to the Kong family chamber as staff had suggested. Today, she had only gone out to buy daily necessities when she unexpectedly saw a young man whose face matched her third spirit almost perfectly, 80 or 90% alike. Wang Donger's gaze hardened as she traced the younger, living profile. It couldn't be a coincidence. He had to be connected to whatever had happened to her. He probably knew the truth about those 3 months. Without hesitation, she followed him. The pair ahead stopped and eventually entered a dignified, unassuming mansion. Wang Donger's eyes locked on the plaque above the gate, Kong family. Kong Family Chamber of Commerce. Her suspicions hardened. She took a breath and began planning. First, learn the young man's identity, then find an opportunity to make contact. Only if that failed would she risk going to the Chamber of Commerce herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by a clear, familiar voice behind her. Donger, she turned to see Ancient Autumn approach. Golden hair, red eyes, delicate features with a slightly spirited look. Ancient Autumn was a classmate and friend from the academy, stronger than most and more capable than Wang Donger. Wang Donger swallowed her panic and forced a calm answer. "Oh, Ancient Autumn, what are you doing here?" Ancient Autumn blinked. "Guyo asked me to pick up the metal materials she ordered and grab a few things on the way back. I saw you lurking here and thought I'd check on you. What's wrong?" Wang Donger let her eyes flicker and said vaguely, "Nothing, just out for a walk." A trace of doubt crossed Ancient Autumn's face. She had come looking for clues about the Son of Destiny on Lord Sister's orders and found nothing, but now something in the air caught her attention. Her nose twitched as if sniffing out a scent, and her gaze slid past Wang Donger toward the Kong mansion. Her eyes shifted subtly. She'd noticed it too. 154. If you're a real man, you should pilot a Mecha. Time flowed, and another month blinked by. In an outer district of the capital, a temporary forging hall was set up, equipped with top-tier spirit tool temperature control and soundproofing. The air inside was scorching. Dozens of burly men with calm, practiced demeanors stood in a circle, all holding their breath and watching the center. There, shirtless and sweating, stood Xiao Hongchen. White hair, heterochromatic eyes, muscles gleaming as sweat evaporated instantly in the heat. He gripped a specially made heavy forging hammer, eyes locked on the metal in front of him with a terrifying, absolute focus. Clang, clang, clang! A steady rhythm of hammer strikes filled the room, each beat threaded with subtle spirit power fluctuations like war drums. Every impact released a precise burst of spirit power. The hammerhead met the glowing red blank and sent brilliant sparks flying. Xiao Hongchen's expression shifted minutely as he worked, like someone engaged in a concentrated conversation with the metal. Then, after one last heavy blow, timed with a particular cadence, he stopped. The forging hall fell dead silent. Even breath seemed to pause. On the table, the metal that had only been faintly aglow now looked as if something inside it had awakened. A soft spiritual light, pulsing like a breath, rose from the blank. For a beat there was nothing, and then, "Ha! It's done! I did it! It's done!" Xiao Hongchen's booming laughter shattered the quiet. Excitement poured out of him, and the onlookers burst into cheers, crowding the table to see the transformed metal. From the observation room above, Meng Hongchen watched her older brother prance around and rubbed her forehead with an embarrassed smile. What a fool! Kong Ming'an leaned on the railing with interest, a faint blue light flickering in his eyes as he examined the forged piece. This was semi-spirit forging. In just a month, Xiao Hongchen had completed 100 forging and then 1,000 forging. The speed was due largely to the 9 Treasure Glazed Tile School's vast collection of forging classics and the preserved notes of divine craftsmen across Duluo continent over 10,000 years. The school bought and archived anything that might be useful. Money was no object. Among their tomes were mature 100 forging theories and general directions for 1,000 forging, which saved Kong Ming'an a great deal of deduction time. Coupled with Xiao Hongchen's terrifying natural talent for metalwork, enhanced by his 3-legged golden-toed spirit, progress came fast. In 7 days, including the first 2 days just getting familiar with the process, Xiao Hongchen mastered stable 100 forging. Then, with Kong Ming'an's guidance, he spent another 20-plus days breaking through and stabilizing 1,000 forging. Some might ask, why call this result semi-spirit forging when he only reached 1,000 forging? Because the blank he forged from wasn't ordinary metal. It was sentient metal that already possessed spirituality. After Xiao Hongchen stabilized his 1,000 forging techniques, Kong Ming'an had him try purifying sentient metal using 1,000 forging. After several failures, this attempt succeeded. Kong judged that, due to the metal's inherent spirituality, its strength surpassed ordinary 1,000 forging metal, though it hadn't made a qualitative leap. The spirit within it had become more active and condensed, hence the apt term semi-spirit forging. A moment later, the forging room door swung open. Still buzzing with excitement, Xiao Hongqian strode out and faced Kong Ming'an, chest thrust forward with undisguised pride. "How is it?" Kong Ming'an nodded and praised sincerely. "Not bad." "Of course," Xiao Hongqian chuckled, unashamedly arrogant. "I'm a genius after all." Kong Ming'an neither confirmed nor denied. He said slowly, "Next, you need to keep forging. Using sentient metal as the blank is a shortcut. Your next goal should be forging metal to spontaneously develop spirituality through technique. That would be true spirit forging. Forging is an indispensable step toward mass-producing usable spirit forging metal. So far, spirit tool machinery had imitated and replicated the forging techniques, allowing standardized, batch production of basic 100 forging metal. But scaling 1,000 forging metal, and especially spirit forging metal, would require many more samples. Xiao Hongqian considered this thoughtfully and didn't mind the prospect. His spirit was unique. Forging high-grade metal could yield him pure energy from the metal itself. Forging was a form of cultivation and more efficient than ordinary cultivation. Continuous forging only benefited him. He leaned in, nudged Kong Ming'an with an elbow, and lowered his voice. "By the way, you're making all this high-grade metal in secret, planning to build something big? Can I join?" Kong Ming'an paused, then sent a design blueprint through the Lingshu network. Xiao Hongqian opened it. After a single glance, his eyes flared. The blueprint showed a set of armor, complex, exquisitely detailed, powerful and beautiful in its lines. "This is? I'll call it Doluo armor for now," Kong Ming'an explained. He'd based the concept on his grandfather's Mecha and on later generations' Doluo armor ideas. Compared to a Mecha, Doluo armor would be more versatile, possibly serving as an enhancement for spell cultivators and body cultivators. It was only a sketchy concept at this stage, the kind of thing you turn into a presentation to secure funding. Xiao Hongqian stared, growing more animated by the second. He began tapping and swiping on the virtual blueprint, making rapid suggestions. "Ming'an, change this. Add thicker composite plates here, here, and here. Embed linked spirit tool cannon arrays along these joints. On the back, add interface ports for large thrusters." As he rattled off modifications, the shared blueprint reshaped in real time. What had started as tight-fitting armor gradually evolved into a humanoid suit with heavy firepower platforms. Kong Min watched the design take on a familiar silhouette and went momentarily speechless. Good heavens, wasn't this turning into a simplified, scaled-down version of his grandfather's Mecha, or at least a kind of humanoid spirit tool? "Do you like this style?" Kong Ming'an asked. "Of course." Xiao Hongqian's eyes glittered. "It has to be tall and imposing to look cool, 4 or 5 meters high, 12 spirit tool cannons of different types mounted all over, high-power thrusters on the legs and back for mobility, a giant melee spirit tool sword and a heavy spirit tool shield, and piloted by a spirit master. This is what a man should drive." Watching Xiao Hongqian's eager face as if he couldn't wait to jump into the blueprint itself, Kong Ming'an couldn't help smiling. He hesitated for a moment, then patted the young man on the shoulder. "Don't worry, you'll get it." Xiao Hongqian's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Absolutely." Kong Ming'an nodded, but because he couldn't openly reveal his grandfather's mech project, he kept it vague. "Your modified blueprint is feasible. The only catch is that the material requirements will be higher." "Materials aren't a problem," Xiao Hongqian announced. "I'll head to the forge right now. I'll make whatever you need." He popped a blue-silver clear heartgrass into his mouth for a burst of energy and sprinted back to the searing forge, full of purpose. Meng Hongqian watched her older brother go inside. "I seriously doubt I'll ever get a sister-in-law," she muttered. Before, he cultivated all day. Now he lives in the forge with the metal. "Having a goal you love is a good thing," Kong Ming'an said, trying to comfort her. Meng Hongqian rolled her eyes. "Do you honestly think everyone has admirers lining up just because they sit in a lab like you do?" Kong Ming'an said nothing. She snorted softly and switched to business. "That girl, Wang Donger, she's been waiting at the Mingmeng Chamber of Commerce for 6 whole days, pestering them to see you. How much longer do you plan to keep her waiting? No need to rush. I'll see her soon." Kong Ming'an's tone was calm, but he tilted his head toward Meng Hongqian. "Do you want to come?" "Of course," she replied without hesitation. You're the kind of person who corrupts pretty young girls just by being nearby. If I don't come, who knows how completely you'll ruin her." "It wouldn't go that far," he said. "Hard to tell." Meng trusted her childhood sweetheart completely. He could ask her to do anything, and she would. But when it came to other girls, she did not trust him in the least. They didn't linger in the forge. Kong Ming'an took Xiao Hongchen's piece of half-spirit forged metal as a sample, and the three of them returned to the Mingmeng Chamber of Commerce headquarters. They stepped out of the spatial ripple and appeared in the office area. A staff member who had been prepped to receive them approached and led them to a door. With a keycard, the staff unlocked it and admitted them. It wasn't an interrogation room or a cell, but a comfortable employee dorm. Gentle spirit tool lighting warmed the space. Plush carpet covered the floor. Bookshelves and green plants lined the walls. A small round table with a neat cloth sat near some inviting sofas. Against the inner wall, beside a single bed, a young girl sat shrunken into herself. Her blue-pink hair, dulled under the light, lay over her shoulders. She kept her head bowed and clutched the hem of her clothes, her whole posture radiating suppressed unease. At the sound of the door opening, she finally looked up. Her guarded, slightly stubborn blue-pink eyes, forcibly calm despite the worry, met Kong Ming'an's. At that instant, Wang Donger's third spirit, which had been utterly unresponsive, trembled. The faint fluctuation, caused by the man's proximity, confirmed what she'd suspected deep in her heart. It was him. Anger, grievance, and a stubborn, desperate resolve surged through her. She stared at Kong Ming'an as if trying to see through him. Ever since she encountered him, she'd been quietly investigating his identity by whatever means she could without attracting attention. What she'd found, scant as it was, pointed to one conclusion. He was the sole blood descendant of Kong Deming, the man spoken of as the Empire's pillar. Rumors said Kong Deming was a genius in spirit tool technology who kept to himself. Reliable information about him was rare, and his family was protected. He had done something to her. He hadn't forced her to obey, and yet he had allowed her to leave. That meant he held leverage, enough to make sure she wouldn't run away. When she probed further, there was a blank. If she resisted, she likely had nowhere to hide. She'd be caught the moment she left the capital. In those circumstances, coming here and presenting herself seemed the only way to get answers. If she cooperated, maybe she'd learn what happened to her big father and second father. Disappearances she suspected were connected to this man or to his powerful grandfather. Humiliation and helplessness knotted in her chest. She was no longer the young lord of the Clear Sky sect. She had no capital to fight back. No matter what he did, she would have to bear it until he was satisfied. So she had come. She had endured 6 days in that comfortable but invisible cage, preparing herself to face whatever shameless demand he might make. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask the questions she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. Before the words could form, Kong Ming'an raised a hand. "Don't rush," he said softly. Under Wang Donger's astonished gaze, the air beside Kong Ming'an warped and a gray doorway opened. He glanced at her with an expression so calm it felt like an order. "Come, I'll take you to see something. We can talk after." Without looking back, he stepped into the gray doorway, Meng Hongchen at his side. They vanished. Wang Donger froze. They were leaving, without letting her speak. The speech she'd prepared over 6 days evaporated. For a moment, she stood stock still, bewildered. Then, she didn't hesitate. Struggling past the confusion, she surged after them, stepped into the gray doorway, and disappeared as well. The gray haze drained from her vision, and the solid feeling of the ground returned. Wang Donger blinked and looked around, her pupils narrowing as she took in the change. She stood on a vast, silver-gray metal plaza beneath a domed ceiling that gave off a soft light. Around her rose austere high-rises. Unfamiliar metal vehicles sped along fixed tracks through the air. In the distance, people in uniformed guild attire hurried between buildings. An efficient, technologically advanced bustle. The soul tool technology here outstripped anything she'd seen at the academy. This place. A shock of disbelief tightened in her chest. Had the Sun Moon Empire really developed like this? She didn't have time to dwell on it. Kong Ming'an and Meng Hongchen were already striding ahead as if she weren't there. With no choice, she swallowed her astonishment and hurried to keep up. They followed a broad avenue to a massive, semicircular domed building. A metal door slides silently open, revealing a large interior filled with precise soul tool instruments. In the center, two figures sat in specialized metal chairs, transparent tubes attached to them. White-robed attendants were taking routine blood samples from the two divine beasts. As the door opened, the two creatures looked up. They were about to greet Kong Ming'an, but their gazes snagged on the blue and pink blur behind him. Wang Donger, staring at them blankly, trembling. Her lips quivered. Instantly, her eyes filled and crystalline tears spilled down. "Big father, second father," she choked. "Little Donger, what are you doing here?" Erming shot up, anxiety all over his face. "You didn't try to kill him too, did you?" Deming's expression shifted. He slapped the back of Erming's head to shut him up, then turned a respectful, solemn look to Kong Ming'an. "Young Master Kong, this—" Kong Ming'an waved him off. His voice was calm, almost casual. "I'm giving you an hour. Explain everything to her yourselves. After an hour, bring her to see me." Deming paused, dared not argue, then bowed and said, "Yes." Kong Ming'an and Meng Hongchen didn't linger. They left the building, leaving Wang Donger and the two complicated, guilt-ridden figures to deal with what followed. As they walked down a cool-toned corridor, Meng Hongchen narrowed her eyes, leaned in, and teased, "You're really not going to play hard to get? I saw that girl almost break just now." Kong Ming'an took her hand. "It's more efficient this way." Letting Da Ming and Erming tell the story themselves, how they had attempted the assassination, been outmatched, captured, and spared the immediate sentence in favor of working off their crimes, would be far more convincing than any explanation he could give. They reached a simply furnished office. Kong Ming'an sat on a couch, produced a soul tool tablet, hooked into the Lingshu network, and began drafting the introductory outline for the artifact cultivator system. Meng Hongchen kicked off her shoes, stretched out on a long sofa, and rested her silk-covered feet on his lap in a casual, intimate gesture. She, too, connected to the Lingshu network and began handling the guild's affairs in the capital. They worked in companionable silence, each absorbed in their tasks. An hour passed. The door opened softly, and the blue and pink figure returned. Wang Donger entered with her head bowed. Her eyes were puffy and rimmed red. Her gaze had a hollow, resigned quality, as if an exquisite doll had been drained of its soul. Both occupants of the room turned to her, their attention pressed down on her like a physical force. She clutched the hem of her skirt until her knuckles whitened, took a long breath, and forced her voice steady, though it cracked with emotion. "Thank you." Kong Ming'an looked up from his tablet, curious. "Thanking me?" She lifted her face, met his eyes for a moment, then dropped her gaze again. "Thank you for not killing my big father and second father." Deming and Erming had told her everything. They had struck first but been outclassed and captured. Their captors had spared them execution and instead arranged for them to work off their transgression. That mercy was something she could not ignore. She owed it gratitude. But gratitude collapsed quickly into despair. Her hands tightened on her skirt and she sank to her knees. "Can you let them go? I beg you." For the once proud young lord of the Clear Sky sect, kneeling like this was a measure of how resolved she'd become. Meng Hongchen, watching nearby, that arched an eyebrow and poked Kong Ming'an with her foot, waiting for his answer. Kong Ming'an glanced at Miss Meng, who was clearly enjoying the scene, then shook his head. "No." Wang Donger's eyes dimmed. Tears shimmered at the corners, but she steadied herself as if deciding something irrevocable. "I'm willing to give up everything. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it." Kong Ming'an's brow twitched with recognition. There was something familiar in that line. When he had signed a contract with the Snow Empress, hadn't it sounded much the same? At the same time, a private message blinked across his Lingshu interface from Meng Hongchen. "When did you learn to train people like this?" Chapter 157, Wang Donger's Memories Are Awakened. Kong Ming'an glanced at Miss Meng beside him, who was clearly enjoying the spectacle, and found himself momentarily speechless. He shook his head, steadied Miss Meng by pressing her mischievous foot down with one hand, then turned to Wang Donger, who was still kneeling on the ground. "Don't overthink it," he said. "I prefer fair transactions, so I'll give you a chance." With that, he shifted his intent, and a document slid through the Ling Shu network into Wang Donger's authorized account. She froze. On instinct, she opened the account, and the file appeared. The document was split in two. The first part was an exhaustive price list, the enormous number of contribution points required to buy Da Ming and Air Ming their freedom. The second part was a personal assistant contract. Sign it, and she would become the personal assistant to the man before her, receive Level 3 authorization for the Ling Shu network, unlock the Merchant Association mission module, and be able to earn contribution points by completing its missions. She read on. The contract looked surprisingly ordinary at first. Time off, bonuses, standard employee benefits. But then she noticed duties that were not ordinary. Among them was a provision to assist with experiments once a month. A chill ran through her. Her eyes flicked to the silver-haired girl on the sofa, lounging close to the youth, and Wang Donger's chest tightened. Had he been restrained from certain actions only because others were around? The thought froze her blood. Still, she did not hesitate long. With a resigned breath, she signed her name on the contract within the Ling Shu network. After a beat of silence, she rose shakily from the ground and looked up at Kong Ming'an, her voice flat. "When do I start?" "In a moment," he replied. "But first, you need to prepare." Lower Realm Tang San was about to hunt for a spirit ring and break through to Spirit Ancestor. By the God Test's design, a new test would begin when Tang San advanced to Spirit Ancestor. To be certain nothing went wrong, Kong Ming'an needed to use Wang Donger's Sea God Martial Soul to modify the God Test again. After the last soul surgery and some rest, her soul should have stabilized somewhat. Now the remaining issues needed addressing. Wang Donger's body trembled. Her gaze found the silver-haired girl beside her, and her hands clenched. Her voice shook. "We? Together?" "Yes." Kong Ming'an answered casually, his attention already on the Ling Shu network as he studied knowledge about soul unsealing. Wang Donger sank into a kind of numb despair. She had hoped for time to prepare, but this was happening immediately, and with that girl present. Feeling toyed with and stripped of dignity, she shut her eyes and braced herself. But the touch she expected never came. Instead, a warm, gentle sensation rested on her glabella. Before she could question the gesture, a crisp sound like a lock clicking echoed in her mind. Then an overwhelming tide of information smashed into her consciousness as if a dam had burst. The seals gave way, buried memories rushed back, images flickered through her mind in a blur. She saw a tall, majestic man with long blue hair she instinctively called father. She saw a gentle-faced woman full of love whom she called mother. She remembered a beautiful woman who had kissed her forehead and bestowed the radiant goddess butterfly spirit on her. She saw an auntie who loved to hold her, with lovely emerald green eyes and a tender smile, and many other kind uncles and aunts. The memories were warm and carefree. In the place called the God Realm, she had been cherished and protected. Everything had been bright and happy. Then the scene suddenly turned cold and warped. She overheard a conversation between her parents about a plane called Duluo. Young and curious, she wanted to see it for herself. But before she could act, her father appeared. At first, she felt guilty, certain she had been discovered and would be scolded. Then, without warning, he reached out and tore her soul apart. Divine force ignored her shrieks and struggles as he split her soul into two equal halves. The pain from the soul origin was unbearable, tearing at her from the inside. She didn't understand why the majestic man she had called father would do this to her. All she could do was repeat apologies until she could no longer speak. The pain stretched on as the seals descended and her memories began to blur and lock away. With her last strength, she managed one desperate question. "Why? Father?" His answer was cold. "Everything is for the sake of the millennia-long plan." The torrent of memories retreated. Wang Donger's consciousness snapped back to the present, like a drowning person hauled from water. She gasped, clutching her chest. The pain, the betrayal of being torn apart by those closest to her, felt like steel needles driven repeatedly through heart and soul. Her eyes reddened. She wanted to scream and to demand answers, but her voice failed her. Only silent, violent tears fell. Kong Ming'an did not stand by idly. He sighed softly and laid his palm, shrouded in gentle mental force, lightly on the shaking girl's head. The calm power acted like a shield, isolating the most overwhelming effects of the returned memories and slowly easing the suffering that racked her body and soul. Thankfully, at least it wasn't completely ruined. The young woman still breathed deeply, her body trembling violently. After a short while, her breathing steadied and the shaking subsided. Seeing her calm down, Ming'an withdrew his hand, a flicker of complexity in his eyes. In temporarily isolating those painful memories, he had also glimpsed scenes that made clear what she had endured. Wangdonger lifted her head. Her eye sockets were red, tear stains still wet. Her lips trembled as she searched for an answer, her voice hoarse and broken. "These were all my memories?" "Yes," Ming'an said softly. "To ease the burden on your soul, I lifted the seal on your memories." "Why?" Her eyes were terrifyingly hollow, like glass shattered and barely pieced back together, ready to crumble at a touch. "Did my father do that to me?" Ming'an fell silent. It was a question hard to answer. What kind of father would tear his daughter's soul apart to use as a leash for a dog? He hadn't even bothered with anesthesia, just ripped it apart. If the memories were sealed, she would forget, and if she forgot, then in his mind he could pretend nothing happened. Hard to judge. Miss Meng Hongchen, who had been watching from the side with some amusement, could not keep quiet any longer. She shot him a look and sent a brief, scolding message. "How could you do that to her?" "I really didn't mean to," Ming'an replied, then turned his attention to the delicate, listless face before him, a face that looked as if it could be manipulated at will. He paused, then asked suddenly, "Do you want to see your father?" Wangdonger froze, then raised her eyes. For a moment, a light returned to those hollow depths, complex, tangled with bone-deep hatred and confusion. She reached out and gripped Ming'an's arm until her fingertips whitened. "I want to." Ming'an exhaled. Confirmed, she wasn't broken yet. Stardew Great Forest, at the edge of the mixed zone. In a relatively open glade, a massive 10,000-year heavy ant with a metallic sheen to its carapace was dragging a dying spirit beast back toward its nest. Just as it was about to slip into the burrow, a sharp figure descended from the sky. 8 standard spirit rings flared, and an oppressive force crashed down. Without hesitation, the figure condensed spirit power into a palm blade and struck the fragile joint between the heavy ant's head and thorax. Bang! The heavy ant never had a chance to resist before it went limp. The spirit Duluo lifted the unconscious creature with one hand and vanished into the forest. He soon arrived at a temporary camp where over 10 young spirit masters, mostly spirit elders and spirit ancestors in cultivation, were gathered. 3 other spirit Duluo and 2 openly present titled Duluo stood as well. Such a formidable guard was the new regulation of Zhang Lexuan, the new head of the Outer Court Spirit Department and Sea God Pavilion's Reserve Master, instituted after the Mixed Zone tragedy. Any Academy spirit hunt must be accompanied by at least 2 titled Duluo and several senior teachers to supervise, eliminating dereliction of duty. The spirit Duluo carried the unconscious heavy ant to a more secluded spot in the camp. Sitting there alone, looking out of place among the others, was Tang San, who had recovered and come with the team to hunt for a spirit ring. "Tang San, look at this 10,000-year heavy ant. Does it meet your requirements?" the spirit Duluo asked as he adjusted the spirit tool law enforcement device and set the heavy ant before Tang San. Tang San glanced at the weakened heavy ant, felt its heavy power attribute, and nodded. "It's acceptable." A titled Duluo team leader approached and repeated the warning seriously. "Tang San, are you sure you want to attempt to absorb this 10,000-year spirit ring by skipping ranks? You should be aware of the risk of soul shock." Tang San lifted his head. A flash of annoyance crossed his face, and his tone was clipped. "I know my limits. No need to worry." The titled Duluo ceased his persuasion and merely nodded. Then good luck. He could not feel much goodwill toward this student, who had cheated on the freshman assessment and who kept to himself. He had fulfilled his duty to warn him. The rest was Tang San's responsibility. A spirit tool law enforcement device recorded the entire process. Shrek had emphasized keeping a paper trail to protect them from any disciplinary action by the new head of the spirit department. Tang San ignored the others and approached the heavy ant. With a flash, a dagger pierced the creature's vital spot. Its life force drained rapidly, and a deep black spirit ring emerged. Tang San sat cross-legged, regulated his breathing, and began to absorb it. Spirit surged into him. Thanks to his body hardened by his world-shocking talent and the Asura god's divine force, the 10,000-year spirit ring posed no difficulty. In 2 hours, he had absorbed it completely. A trace of joy touched his face as he prepared to check the spirit ability the ring granted. Then, buzz. An indescribable fluctuation radiated outward. Sound ceased. The wind stilled, leaves froze in place, and dust suspended motionless in the air. In the camp, students conversing, Spirit Duluo and titled Duluo standing guard. Everything seemed utterly frozen. It was as if time itself had paused. Consciousness stalled. No one was aware of anything around them. The effect came from Da Ming's slowing domain, pushed to its limit, and superimposed with the consciousness takeover of the spiritual pivot. In that absolute silence and stasis, the space beside Tang San rippled like water. 3 figures stepped out without a sound. Kong Ming'an looked calmly at Tang San. Beside him, Miss Meng draped an arm over his casually. Behind them stood Wang Donger, pale-faced, her eyes filled with hatred. Kong Ming'an did not need to point out Tang San. Guided by the sea god martial soul within her, Wang Donger's gaze landed directly on him, who was still excitedly looking at his 10,000-year spirit ring. Wang Donger felt the aura radiating from the man. It resembled the father in her fragmented memories, but it made her stomach twist with instinctive revulsion. She swallowed her emotions and asked, voice trembling faintly, "Is this my father?" "More or less," Kong Ming'an said calmly. "What you're looking at is an existence possessed by a wisp of his divine sense. In essence, it's his clone. Possession." Wang Donger repeated the word, disgust flashing across her face. She drew a deep breath, forcing down the turmoil, and asked, "You brought me here just to see him?" "Just a routine experiment," Kong Ming'an answered casually. He extended a finger, and before she could react, tapped the spot between her eyebrows. Immediately, a vast, majestic aura unfurled from her. A handsome, deep blue phantom in ornate robes condensed behind her, and then stepped forward. Wang Donger was stunned. Her usually unruly spirit had manifested in full for the first time. At the same time, a subtle pressure pushed in from the depths of her soul. She frowned and felt sudden weariness. She looked up at the young man before her, bewildered and at a loss for words. Kong Ming'an offered an explanation at once. "Because your soul was literally torn apart, your condition is very poor. You're in a fragile, unhealed state. It's normal to feel discomfort and fatigue. And this spirit? I made it for you." Kong Ming'an's gaze stayed on the sea god martial soul as he spoke. This sea god martial soul was forged from the sea god's divine force, some residual divine thought, and a portion of my own mental force. It's a genuine divine rank spirit. It should have given you enormous advantage, but since your soul is damaged, you can't fully bear it. Right now, most of its power is being passively siphoned to nourish and repair your soul. If you want to use it openly, you'll have to raise your cultivation and let your soul heal. His tone was matter of fact. A soul torn in two was a severe injury, but not hopeless. Because Wang Donger was the daughter of the God King, born in the God realm, her soul's essence was unusually high, and Elder Yi, who had knowledge of the soul domain, had ways to promote recovery. With those conditions, her soul could be mended. "What about the 3 months I was unconscious?" she asked. "I was performing soul surgery and shaping your third spirit," Kong Ming'an confirmed. Wang Donger bowed her head, silent for a long beat, then murmured, "Thank you." Kong Ming'an didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the sea god martial soul. "No need to thank me. After all, I had to use your spirit. The tab for these services has already been added to what you owe for your big father and second father. Remember to pay it back." The words hit her like a physical blow. Wang Donger choked, unable to speak. She glanced unconsciously at the spirit beside her, feeling something like betrayal. He had helped condense and stabilize the spirit, but she couldn't access her own spirit freely, yet someone else could command it at will. It made her feel like a scabbard and her spirit a divine sword forged by another, kept inside her and wielded by someone else. Was she now only to obey and wait to be drawn? She watched Kong Ming'an with narrowed lips. He had closed his eyes and appeared to be manipulating her spirit, through some unseen link. Then she felt an invisible thought slide along that connection, merging with the sea god martial soul behind her. The spirit's dull, hollow eyes brightened. A vast, flickering image passed over them, as if it had awoken. Kong Ming'an adjusted a hand, then let a thread of spirit power and mental force trail from his fingertip. He began to interfere with the god test that was running inside Tang San's body. As if on a whim, he plucked Tang San's soul from the air and set it before Wang Donger. "You can look at his memories," he said, multitasking. "Use your thoughts to link to the spiritual pivot. It'll help you read them. Read slowly. Don't kill him. I still need him." Wang Donger stared. You could view another person's memories so directly? She hesitated only a moment before she obeyed, tentatively sending out her thoughts. Instruction received. Beginning connection to target soul for memory retrieval. A calm, neutral voice, the spiritual pivot, sounded in her mind. Immediately a panel of the Lingshu network unfolded before her, and fragments of Tang San's memories, neatly categorized, appeared for her to browse. Wang Donger stared, stunned, then, after a breath, confirmed that they were indeed his memories. She looked back at Kong Ming'an and whispered another, quieter, "Thank you." "Don't mention it," he replied. Wang Donger lowered her gaze and composed herself. She had already thanked him several times today. She felt faintly ridiculous. She focused on the memories. Around them, the chamber fell into a strained hush. Spirit light pulsed faintly from Kong Ming'an's fingertip. Meng Hongqian watched with mild curiosity. After a while, Kong Ming'an's lips twitched into a small, wicked smile, and he finished adjusting the god test. Meng Hongqian leaned in, eyebrow raised. "Ming'an, that's a very wicked smile." Kong Ming'an chuckled softly. "It's entertaining." He had designed that god test with a certain outcome in mind, a performance of motherly love and filial devotion that he expected to unfold. Watching it now, and seeing the way Wang Donger's expression had changed, he felt amusement ripple through him. Wang Donger had finished reading Tang San's memories as well. Where moments before her eyes had been barely steady, now they were reddened and distant, and deep in them a thread of cold, palpable hatred gleamed. Kong Ming'an's smile widened a touch. Perhaps it wouldn't be only motherly love and filial devotion. Maybe a round of fatherly kindness and filial piety would be added too. Was this some kind of legacy? Tang San collapsed yet again. Wang Donger came to herself, shook her head and croaked, "I'm fine." "Truly fine?" "Truly fine," she answered through gritted teeth. This Tang San was not entirely the man she had once called father. His memories were shattered and blurred, but enough remained for her to be certain of one thing. To that exalted father, she had never been a daughter to be loved, only a tool to be used and discarded. The kinship had been a facade, an illusion had been ripped away. Cold hatred replaced any hope she had harbored for that blood relationship. Kong Ming'an watched her thoughtfully, asking no more, offering no consolation. Wang Donger had grown up with fragmented memories and a hunger for family affection. To discover that those hopes had been built on deception, that she had been merely exploited and that her soul had been torn apart, such trauma required time and solitude to process. Her relative composure in that moment spoke to a hard-won resilience. This wound would heal only with time and by herself. With matters concluded, the group did not linger. Spatial ripples unfurled once more and swallowed the three figures. As they left, the slowness domain that had enveloped the camp and the deliberate interference of the spiritual pivot quietly dissipated. Everything resumed its ordinary cadence. The wind still blew, the leaves still stirred, students murmured, and teachers remained alert. Tang San stared at the 10,000-year spirit ring hovering before him, his eyes bright with exhilaration. He had done it, truly done it. Absorbing a 10,000-year spirit ring cross-rank, this was a feat worthy of shaking the world. He barely had time to steady himself when a voice from the god test rang in his ear. "Sea God, 5th god test activated." Tang San smiled. He had expected it. But before he could delve into the god test buried within his soul, a fresh, terrible pain surged up from his soul origin like a tsunami. "Ah!" As if his bones were being wrenched out, Tang San screamed. He stumbled to his feet and collapsed again, clutching his head and thrashing. His eyes were bloodshot. Guttural sounds tore from his throat. The agony spread from his soul through every fiber of his body, as though his whole being were being ripped apart. Then, as if the pain had reached some unbearable threshold, his limbs went limp and he fell motionless to the ground. What happened? It's Tang San. Students and teachers nearby were stunned and swarmed in. A titled Duluo instructor stepped forward to examine him. Moments later, he frowned and said gravely, drawing the attention of the bewildered onlookers, "Do you see? This is the price of forcibly absorbing a 10,000-year spirit ring cross rank. The soul cannot withstand the impact of the remnant spirit beast soul." Tang San's soul has been injured. Luckily, his luck held and the damage isn't too severe, but he'll need a long period of rest to recover. The crowd looked at Tang San, twitching on the ground like a fallen animal, and exchanged silent, uneasy glances. The danger of cross-rank absorption had become painfully real. Why had this happened now? Simply because Wang Donger's probing of Tang San's memories had been a touch too aggressive in the turmoil of her emotions. It wasn't intended to be fatal. After all, the victim hadn't protested, so it must be survivable. In any case, he wouldn't die. The spatial doorway opened calmly inside Kong Ming'an's private laboratory at the Merchant Guild, and the three figures reappeared. After a brief conversation and a few instructions, Wang Donger took a steadying breath. She lowered her eyes, her long lashes hiding the turmoil beneath, bowed slightly to Kong Ming'an and Meng Hongchen, and then left the lab. Outside at the Merchant Guild entrance, the evening air brought a cool clarity that allowed her a moment's composure. The contribution points required to redeem Big Father and Second Father were astronomically high, but she had not lost hope. 10 years, 20 years, or more of accumulation. It was at least a concrete goal. That was better than wandering aimlessly for clues. She needed a plan, how to earn contribution points more efficiently, how to raise her own strength faster. The latter was the priority. Strength was everything. A titled Duluo earned dozens of times the points from a casual mission compared to what she could manage now. She had to cultivate harder and pay off that debt. Determination flared in her, but then she remembered her role as a laboratory assistant, and her expression softened into a more complicated one. She would take it step by step. If it became unbearable, she could always lie low and regroup. Lost in these thoughts, Wang Donger walked back toward the Sun Moon Royal Soul Engineer Academy. Just as she reached the dormitory entrance, her steps paused. Ahead stood a blonde, red-eyed girl who had evidently just returned as well. Wang Donger did not feel sociable, but she forced a smile and greeted her. "Good evening, Chuer." Chuer blinked, then stepped forward. Her golden hair framed eyes that lingered on Wang Donger's face as if searching for something. "Good evening, Donger. I didn't see you all day. Where did you go?" Wang Donger's eyes shifted. She skirted around the question. "Nothing special. I went to the Merchant Guild to take care of some matters. I'm just heading back to the dorm to rest." She decided to keep the truth to herself for now. Too many threads were tangled, and she would not drag this new friend into them. "The Merchant Guild?" Chuer nodded, but did not press further. "Then you should get some rest, Donger." Wang Donger nodded, slipped past Chuer, and hurried into the dormitory. Chuer watched her hurry away, her red eyes thoughtful. Her approach to Wang Donger had been on the orders of her elder sister, the Master, to find clues about the Son of Destiny through this girl who bore special marks of fate. For a time, she had even staked out the perimeter of the Kong residence, convinced that the aura she sought originated there. But her luck had been poor. She had found nothing and seen no one.